Just when I start to get the handle on something, they come out with some...
With your hosts, Chip and Nicole, every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. We delve into UFOs, abductions, ghosts, aliens, conspiracies, and cryptozoology.
And how could you ever forget about those creepy topics you won't hear on your local news?
This is where I would insert my obligatory skeptical statement. The Mind Cemetery, where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest.
Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on Facebook. Also, check us out on our website, mindcemetery.com, for show updates and the critically acclaimed Mind Cemetery blog.
It's not critically acclaimed, but you should check it out anyway, mindcemetery.com.
Well, these two little guys about 4 feet tall jumped out of their space-age Greyhound bus. They grabbed me by the arms and said, "Start walking, Dan, you're coming with us." Abduction. They didn't actually speak, but I understood them. Telepathy.
Hi, I'm psychic medium Christopher George, and along with my co-host, Victor the Voice Furman, with Second Sight NYC. Victor, who do we have as a guest this week?
Chris, our guest this week is Kathleen Martin. She works full-time as an author, alien abduction researcher, and lecturer. She has more than 22 years' experience in the field, and she's the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, the first abductees whose story stirred worldwide interest. She has lectured at conferences across the United States and appeared on numerous TV specials on alien abduction. And she's the author of the book, The Alien Abduction Files, the most startling cases of human-alien contact ever reported.
Victor, her book does not include my personal case when I was abducted by 6 aliens. They were aliens from Sweden and members of the Swedish bikini team. You know what? I don't need any hypnotic regression to remember that night.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we host News on the Flip Side. Come join us every Saturday night at 7 p.m. Central for our 3-hour program. We have opinions on everything, and we're not afraid to share them. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can find it here with News on the Flip Side. Remember, don't be politically correct. Just be correct. Join us.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome to another episode of the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and once again, we have another fascinating topic and guest tonight. But before we jump off to that conversation, we do have some announcements to make as usual. Now, for tonight's show, like always, I would love to hear from the listening audience. So, send your questions and comments to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com. I promise I won't give out your name or email, and I won't send you any spam. So don't be shy. I know that you have something on your mind that you would love to have the answer to. And don't forget, there is a page on Facebook for all you Facebookers out there where you can easily post comments and ask for future topics. It also has upcoming guests, any last-minute schedule changes, and all the other kind of handy-dandy stuff to keep up to the minute on. So it's really easy to check out. It is a closed group, so just send a message to join it, and boom, I will let you in, and you can post away to your heart's content. we did have to go to that method with that page because of spammers. Don't we love spammers? Now, for everybody, I also have a author page myself, which you can go and click like, showing me support for my written endeavors. That's also on Facebook. And don't forget, you can always email me directly, whether it's questions for tonight's guest or about something else in the program. Just send it off to giascott@exogenynetwork.com. Now, tonight, our scheduled guest had a family emergency and had to be rescheduled, but our guest co-host happens to be an excellent person to have as a guest during the series as well. Her name is Claudia Dillaire, and we're going to continue our author conversation series tonight with putting her in the hot seat. So, Claudia, would you introduce yourself to the audience?
Certainly. My name is Claudia Dillaire. I am an author of not only fiction but nonfiction. My primary area of expertise is ancient Egypt. I've written 3 nonfiction books on different aspects of ancient Egyptian magic. My first novel, The Wrath of Amun, a mystery set in ancient Egypt, was released in 2011. And the second book in the series, The Talisman of Tahuti, is scheduled for release the end of July.
Great. So, we've had all sorts of authors on here, ranging from young adult and children's fiction all the way up to horror. What genre would you put your books in?
I am definitely historical fiction. Well, my novels are historical fiction.
And, of course, your other ones
nonfiction is New Age.
New Age, okay. And I find that a lot of times these lines between the different genres. Now, in your case with the fiction novel, it's a really clear-cut historical fiction. But a lot of times the lines between them, I mean, even sci-fi to fantasy or sci-fi to just, a thriller of some kind. Yeah, it's such a fine line. I mean, so you kind of have to, I know that when I'm looking for a book to read, I often have to kind of cruise through different genres before I find things that are exactly what I'm kind of in the mood to read, right?
Yeah. Well, although I write historical fiction, you could also say that they are in the mystery genre because every one is a mystery, and by the end of the book, we have solved it. So I guess you could find me in either place.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
I never even really thought about that, but then there's the, there's always, I guess, crossovers between different genres. You've got historical fiction can include romances, mysteries.
Exactly.
Maybe even historical sci-fi. I mean, if you wanted to really kind of, that'd be a twisted one, wouldn't it?
Well, let's be realistic. What was Dracula? They always put Dracula and Frankenstein in the horror genre, but really it would be science fiction, or it could be historical science fiction, because they took place in the 1800s.
Yeah,
so
that's strange.
Although it was written then as well. So
yeah, I haven't read a sort of remake of the whole Frankenstein idea. I'm sure that with the whole body part harvesting sort of thing, you can make a gruesome one today, couldn't you?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. And
in a sense, the zombie books are almost like that.
Yes. And what if you decided you wanted to write a lovely, say, retelling of Dracula, and you wanted to set it in the 1800s? Well, that would be historical fiction. But if you have a vampire or any type of, they like to call them imaginary creatures, then wouldn't that then fall into historical, say, horror or historical science fiction?
Yeah. Well, I think about, a lot of times we tend to tag things with a name. Like in the novel I wrote, there's these creatures that end up being called by the characters in the book werewolves, but they're not shape-shifting werewolves like the werewolves of old. These are some sort of undefined species with, in my case, they do have some paranormal connection because they happen to be associated when they appear. Hard times or troubled times are coming. They happen to only come during those times, which, I didn't explain in the novel because the people don't really know why. But, the whole thing is that, they are, some people will call that a imaginary creature or even refer to it as a werewolf, but it's not a werewolf in the strictest sense. And, a lot of times we do see so much. How important is deciding what genre a book is to the author?
It's not as important to the author from the aspect of when I first sat down to write my novel, I wanted to write a lovely historical mystery. That was my goal. And, because I was a fan when I was young of mystery novels. So I wanted to write a lovely mystery. And it just happened to be that ancient Egypt is my passion. So that was just a natural place for me to do the novel in. When it becomes important is when you start trying to sell this idea to publishers, because publishers want a cut and dry genre that they can say, oh yes, we can market this as a mystery. We can market this as a historical novel. We can market this as a romance. If it's, and unfortunately when it crosses genres, the big name publishers, you think their little heads are going to explode because they're not prepared for this. Thank goodness for small publishers who know how to market these.
Yeah. And, deciding on a genre probably is more important to the self-published author, which is more and more frequent today.
Yes, exactly. Because if you're self-publishing, you could even create your own genre. And, where did steampunk originally come from? I'm sure the first novel that was published under the genre of steampunk, I don't think a major publisher would have known what to do with it. Now it's all the rage.
Well, I have to admit, it's one of those things I'm not sure quite how to define it. I mean, can you tell us what steampunk is?
I'm not too sure I'm even correct, but from what I can gather, steampunk is, I do believe they're set around the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and they have a very Victorian feel to them. Why they're called steampunk, I have no idea.
Well, I've seen examples.
I've never read one.
Well, like I said, I've seen examples of steampunk art. I've seen examples of steampunk bicycles and all sorts of things. It seems to be these really fanciful constructions of old machinery. And I'm trying to imagine a book with that kind of a feel.
Yeah, exactly. And, I don't know if they are mysteries. I don't know if they're horror. I don't know if there's romance in them because I haven't picked one up to read one. Unfortunately, when I'm writing, I don't do as much reading.
Yeah,
I know
it's kind of hard
steampunk
to
is very popular.
It is hard to balance.
Pardon me?
It's hard to
It is.
The two.
It is. I just recently came back from a trip. I took a road trip. I went to my college reunion, and a former college friend of mine and I drove from Massachusetts to Maryland. But in order for me to get to her house, I took a bus, and I was sitting there reading a book. And it was absolutely fabulous to just sit and read a book for a change.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of interesting to do that. I find that I do most of my reading on a computer screen, even the e-books. I usually read on a computer screen.
Yeah.
But on the occasions when I do switch to an actual paper book, it's sort of a nostalgic kind of experience. It's sort of like going to a soda fountain. You know, we don't usually do that either, but that doesn't mean that it isn't something that we cannot appreciate, because it is nice, you know, to sit down with a book sometimes and just chill out.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things used to be to go fishing and read a book.
There you go.
Well, I always said fishing is a good excuse to sit on the banks of a body of water and do absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Occasionally, fish interrupt you and decide that they have to jump on your hook. And I have even had occasions when unbaited hooks tossed into the water because I was tired of catching fish were still tempting enough. I absolutely couldn't get that. It was like, come on now. I didn't want to catch any more. I didn't want to, or maybe I didn't want to catch any at all. I just wanted to look like I was doing something. But yeah, fishing has always been an excuse to sit around and do nothing on a nice day.
I was watching people fish today. I went to one of our lovely beaches here in Harwich, Massachusetts. Sat and watched two men fishing. It was fabulous.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed fishing, and, you know, I know how to clean fish, but sometimes you just aren't in the mood for it. You want to have to clean them. You don't want to have to deal with putting worm or whatever on the hook, and you don't want to deal with getting fish off the hook, and you certainly don't want to clean them afterwards. So, you know, to go fishing then, your best thing was to, it's like you have to have the hook. It'd be so much easier if you just put a sinker on. You know? Don't let anybody find out my secret now. I just announced it on international radio, but that's okay. It's a secret, right?
My lips are sealed.
Yeah. But, you know, the thing is that a lot of times for me, when I'm sitting and it appears I'm doing nothing, in reality, there's a lot of internal workings going on, and I'm surprised smoke's not coming out of my ears, because I may be plotting how to take over the world.
Yes, exactly.
I have great aspirations to being the next world leader. That's why I moved to Laurel, Mississippi, which nobody ever heard of. That's a good reason to live here, is because no world leader has come from this town, so obviously plenty of open ground, right?
Oh, fabulous! Are you going to be a beneficent leader, or are you going to be, you know, like the evil doctor who takes over the world?
Oh, it probably depend on my mood. It really would depend on my mood. There's days when, evil doctor, I definitely ask my husband. He'd tell you I qualify. Evil doctor. Other days it's like, oh yeah, whatever. And I think that's true for most people. You know, we all have our good days.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. Periodically, I'll go on a rant. I think my most recent one that I still get razzed about is my rant on stupid people. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we've all done rants on stupid people.
Oh, yeah. Stupid questions and stupid people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you know, maybe I should write a book with a character that, has a hate on for stupid people. That might be kind of fun and therapeutic, too. Do you find that your characters become like good friends to you? I mean, they almost have a physical being.
Oh, yes. I think of my characters as my family. I know everything about them. Actually, I know more about them sometimes than they know about them.
Oh,
but
yeah.
they tell me. They tell me their story.
You may know their future, and you know that ultimately X, Y, and Z is going to happen, but the rest of the alphabet is pretty much open territory,
Exactly.
Yeah, and do you think it's important for authors to really, I mean, when you compare the writing process and the fact that these imaginary characters become so real to the author, it's almost like you're describing a mental illness. You have this whole imaginary world that you populated it.
Well, in a sense,
sometimes I do question, is there a fine line between mental illness and creative writing?
Well, let's be realistic. You have to be a little mentally ill to spend months, in some cases years, slaving over a computer or paper, whatever your medium, knowing full well when you start sending this out, this now is like your baby, that you're going to be rejected. Isn't there something wrong with that? and yet we keep doing it.
Look how traumatic it is. Now, I haven't sent out the second novel into the world. The first one was independently published, so I never went through the rejection thing because I never submitted it to anybody. I had, what everybody calls their beta readers. I had those go through that, and I had some editing done that way. But I really didn't send it out into the world, and I sat on it for a long time. It just sat there in my computer, discarded, forgotten, abandoned. And every once in a while the characters say, hey, remember me. And I think the reason I went with independent publishing was it was like taking that deep breath and jumping off the high dive and never having gone swimming before. Let's just get over with. We'll either drown or we won't. And that was just kind of the way, I stand here and I'm never going to get wet. But if I just jump off and do it, then, okay, I'm over it already. But it's worse than sending your firstborn child off to kindergarten the first day. I mean, it is the most traumatic thing because you have invested, heart and soul in it, in a sense, really. And it becomes a much more personal kind of rejection. Do you over time, does a person get a little immunized to that protective, almost maternal emotion that you get?
I look at it this way. The first rejection letter I got, I thought about never sending the book out again, and this was when I was doing nonfiction. But then I looked at the rejection letter again, and I said, no, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box. I'm going to keep sending this out because it almost made me want to prove them wrong. It sort of renewed my faith in, yes, this is a good book. They just didn't see it, and I'm going to find someone who does see it. So I kept submitting it, and lo and behold, it was accepted. So it wasn't the writing, it wasn't the subject matter, it wasn't me personally. And the more I wrote, the more I understood that publishers and agents it's all very subjective. It's all in what that person likes or the type of day they're having.
Right. Right. You know, and I do review a lot of books, and I've read a lot of books, and it's a good thing I read very, very fast. And over time, you know, undoubtedly, it was inevitable it was going to happen. I've written some negative reviews, and some have been really, really negative. And, you know, having sent out that baby into the world, my perception of negative reviews has shifted a little bit. Before it was just A or nay, and there was no pity. You might say no mercy. I mean, if I hated it, I was really kind of nasty sometimes, I think, you know, thinking back. Now, you know, granted, there were times if I could avoid it, I simply wouldn't review it at all unless it was really what I considered awful. And there were a couple that I really considered just plain awful and came from well-established writers. And I was like, my God, this was worse than being assigned reading War and Peace in high school. I mean, this was agony. And in those cases, you know, if this is supposed to be a novel from an experienced author, and it was, I felt like it was a high school assignment, and I had to make myself read the book. Yeah, I figured, okay, they can handle it, you know, a negative review. But, you know, I guess as I got more calloused or whatever, I was freer about going ahead and writing. You know, I thought it stunk, you know, in one way or another. And, you know, now I guess maybe I'm a little kinder about, or more specific about what I disliked about the book, you know. And sometimes it's a case of I just didn't like the format it was presented in, the way they told the tale. Maybe I liked the story fine, but, you know. I recently read one, and it was like it had a great synopsis, but when you got done, you felt like you'd read a 10th grade book report about the story. And it was like, it was so great, and the characters never got a chance to show me who they were, you know. And I was really, and those kind of reviews happen too. And, you know, that was the case, is, you know, so I have changed maybe a little bit how I write them. I'm a little more specific, and sometimes I'm a little kinder about it, and, you know, at least more thoughtful. You know, there's no way to kindly say, look, this really stunk, maybe, but you don't have to be mean and nasty about it either.
Sure.
So how did you feel the first time you got a negative review, assuming, because everybody gets them sooner or later?
Well, I've been fortunate so far. Apparently no one has posted anything negative about them.
Well,
so
maybe
that's a good thing so far.
Then positive review.
Well, actually, the ones that I've received on Amazon, a couple of them I had to laugh. They said, you know, we were a little hesitant about the material. Now, this was primarily with my second novel, my second nonfiction book, because I wrote about revenge magic. And the pagan community is not big on revenge magic. And a couple of people, you know, they had posted reviews that the title caught their eye, and they picked it up because they wanted to see what this was all about. And they were pleasantly surprised because I also include protection magic, and, you know, it's not just cursing people. And that's part of what I wanted to get across. We think of revenge as getting back at someone, but you also need to be able to prevent people from hurting you. So there was prevention and protection magic in there. So sometimes, you know, people look at the title of a book or look at the quote-unquote subject matter and say, oh, that's just not for me. You really have to dig a little deeper sometimes.
Now, I happen to be maybe a little bit prejudiced towards that book because that was the first book of yours that I had looked at in the first topic of our first interview. And I found that book was cute and endearing, and I loved the cover art. And, you know, all these things about it were really, really cute. I mean, cool, you know, fun. Find it to be a negative book, it wouldn't have even occurred to me. You know, maybe it's because I've read a wide variety of books in the New Age genre. I've interviewed a wide variety of authors in the New Age genre. And Revenge was really kind of mild in terms of potential volatility of the topic, say. So I didn't find, you know, I wasn't prejudiced against it by the mere title. And I thought that the whole concept worked together really, really well. You know.
Well, I'm the type of person, I don't want to be hurt. I don't think anyone does. However, I'm also intelligent enough that if someone hurts me, rather than taking revenge on them, what I would rather do is protect myself. I'm going to get out of the situation. I'm not going to allow that person to hurt me again. But you do, unfortunately, when you write a book on revenge, get a segment of people who want to know if I will then perform a death spell on someone. That's not the type of person I am. And there are people who actually, you know, are looking for a way to eliminate someone through magic. That's not what magic is.
I always figured that it was good enough if I could just... Go ahead.
Well, I try to explain that to people, and they don't want to hear that because, unfortunately, you have Hollywood that shows you what magic is and what witchcraft is, and that's not what it is.
Right.
So we are constantly fighting this stereotype.
Well, you know, even when I think about the people that have really caused me problems in the past, I didn't wish death on them. I simply wished that they would go away, occupy other space. How they went away, I didn't really care. You know, I had a coworker once that just was making my life miserable. And I will admit I did many spells over a period of a month or so to help her find another job. It wasn't cursing her. I wanted the best for her someplace else.
Exactly.
She found her a better job someplace else. And I was thrilled.
And your life was better, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And, you know, we've all had cases where, you know, and we've all heard of people, too, you know, the woman who splits up with her husband after he's found out to be having an affair, and then she attacks him and stabs him 17 times. There's this vindictiveness. And for some reason, popular culture today is glorifying these vindictive acts, this vindictive behavior. These vindictive personalities. And, you know, that kind of concerns me because hell hath no fury, like, you know, the woman scorned. You know, and, you know, you hear about things like that, especially, you know, in terms of love affecting relationships. And be it male or female, the vindictive acts we've seen cases where children have been murdered, pets have been murdered, ex-spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever, significant others have been murdered. And, you know, it's just goes on and on and on. And vindictive behavior is kind of expensive for our society to indulge in, really.
Yeah. But it's almost acceptable. And that's a very bad line to cross. And the fact that a woman can stab her husband, 17 times because he was having an affair, and, she gets a pass, she gets a walk on this, then we're literally saying that it's okay and that women don't have the self-control to not stab their spouse 17 times, but it's okay because she was a woman and he was having an affair. No, it's not okay. Would it be all right for a husband to stab his wife 17 times because she was having an affair?
Well,
no. He'd throw his sorry butt in jail.
Well, recently in the state of Texas, because I've seen a lot of comments about this through social media recently, man was acquitted of murder after paying a woman to be his escort $150 when she refused to have sex with him. He shot and killed her, and he was acquitted.
Oh no! Oh no!
And
that's not okay.
No, that's not okay. And then we hear about a rape culture and, all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you also, at the same time, you're seeing all this stuff because I watch the social media a fair amount. You'll see all these comments where women are proudly branding themselves in one way or another with the label of bitch. Now, bitch indicates that type of vindictive behavior that we just talked about. Nasty, vindictive behavior. When did becoming a nasty, vindictive woman become a desirable attribute? I missed that development. I was still under the impression that desirable attributes were things like honesty, patience, things like that. Intelligence,
doing a kindness for someone. Oh no. For somewhere along the line, we lost all of that.
Yeah, now it's all about what I get for me, especially if I can take it from somebody else. And I'm kind of, disturbed at this sort of social development, you might say, because there is something wrong with it. Just like answering, disputes with violence, I'm not seeing where branding yourself as nasty and vindictive is completely a good thing.
No, it's not. And I think we're almost, we've gotten to the point where violence in our society doesn't shock us anymore. And that's also a very sad commentary. It's almost like, I remember the first time that someone walked into their workplace because they had been fired. And they went back to work and they started shooting people. And I remember being absolutely horrified by that. Now you hear that someone snapped and you make a joke of it and say, oh, they went postal.
Exactly.
This is not funny, number one. Secondly, we're also, because a lot of workplace violence did occur at post offices, so we're making a commentary on the Postal Service as well. But we've become almost to the point where this does not affect us anymore. And that's not a good thing. It's almost like we expect it. Oh, so-and-so got fired. He's probably going to come back and kill us all. This is not smart.
No. And
we've almost become immune to this.
and there's such a fuss over the different aspects of gun control, of violence in the workplace, of violence in certain situations like emergency rooms and medical facilities, and so forth and so on. And then you start getting in this whole debate over trading freedom for security and whether or not that's a good thing. And I've seen some people who insist that giving up most of our freedoms is perfectly justifiable if we are actually safe. And that raises a lot of other questions, and it's like, okay, you're essentially saying a totalitarian government is fine as long as I'm safe. I don't know about that.
Do you really want a totalitarian government? Go live in China for a while. Go live in North Korea for a while. Go live in Cuba for a while. Or if you want a totalitarian religious government, which a lot of people in this country seem to want, the religious right gets a lot of press. Do we really want this to be considered a Christian country? If you want to know what that's like, then go live in Iraq or Iran for a while or Afghanistan and see if that's what you really, really want. And then come back and say a totalitarian government is what you want.
Right. A lot of people would immediately point out that those are not Christian-based governments, but that's it. The point isn't which religion so much as when a religion operates the government. And if you look at the Christian versions by simply looking at history. Because there have been periods of time when the Vatican had an iron fist.
Yes. There were also times when you had the Crusades. And it was okay to slaughter entire villages because, well, we're doing this in the name of God. Excuse me? Unless I misread the Bible when I was young, that wasn't what God said to go out and do.
Well, yeah, I think most wars have been over who's got the biggest God. It's like whose daddy is bigger.
Yeah. Well, but I debate this quite frequently with a lot of my friends. War fought in the name of religion is a modern construct, and it began with the advent of Christianity. And Christians don't like to hear that. But before the advent of Christianity and the concept of one supreme God, all cultures were pagans. They didn't care what gods you worshipped. When they came in and they had a war, it was over water rights, it was over shipping routes, it may have been a personal dispute, but it had nothing to do with religion.
This is true.
And, I'm not advocating that, we should all become pagans again, because now that we know what it means to fight a war in the name of a deity, we would still be doing it because, we're all pagans, but my deities are better than yours. It doesn't work that way.
Well, it's just like, recently I read it was a response to a post about religion, and this person's response was, all religions should be banned, and all religious books and documents should be burned, and all devout practitioners should be imprisoned. And
that's nice.
I'm thinking, okay, that's just as foolish and extreme as the religious point of view that all believe like me or I'll kill you and that'll change your mind. It's the same sort of foolishness. simply turning the lack thereof into a new religion, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
apparently, this person knows nothing about the Spanish Inquisition, because that's pretty much what they were doing.
Yeah.
They were killing anybody who didn't agree.
Yeah, and that's kind of counterproductive in society as well. It's going to be interesting to see the shifts that occur in the next century in religion, in politics, in government, in international diplomacy, in all of these things, because it is such a touchy subject right now, and everybody seems so volatile about it. The anti-Muslim, the anti-Christian, the anti-Jewish, all of these factions are sort of continually at everybody's throat.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a pagan movement of anti-everybody else yet.
Well,
I'm not anticipating one.
Pagans are not like that. Pagans are accepting of everyone, regardless of what they believe. I have, as Facebook friends, I have pagans, I have Christians, I have Jews, I have Muslims. We all get along on my page, because the only thing I ask is, you are not disrespectful to someone else's belief. And if you are, you're not on my page. It's very simple. And we all get along on my page.
And, I have people from, all over the world in all different religions on mine as well. I haven't seen any flaming going on. That doesn't mean it's never happened, but if it did, I missed it. But would I tolerate it? No. I was, if I had someone start acting like that, and I've had them flame over non-religious topics too. I simply, I don't have the energy to deal with it, and they're going to go away. And that's the way it has to be, because, one bad apple, when you have somebody who just wants to start flaming people, it's not fair to everybody else.
No, it's not.
If they don't like it, they don't have to look at it. They don't have to pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that always makes me very unhappy is when I see someone post, and they've posted on my page that about Muslims and how they're a violent people. It's a violent religion. All they preach is death and destruction. This is very untrue. If anyone were to actually sit and read the Quran and the religious books of Islam, they do not preach violence. They preach peace. The fact that you have extremists, and you have them in all religions, not just Islam, it really frustrates me when people say that. And I always have to, chime in and say, no, that's not what Islam is about. And one of my Muslim friends has messaged me so often saying, it's so nice to see someone who knows what my religion is all about. Well, duh. All you have to do is read. This is not rocket science. But unfortunately, there are people out there who just want someone to tell them, oh, all Muslims are bad, and they believe it. Oh, all Christians are bad, so they believe it.
Sometimes
it's kind of like grow a brain.
People will believe really, really strange things. I was told once by somebody that Easter eggs were symbolic of pagan cannibalism of infant children. And I'm like, Where did you get this from? Well, everybody knows it. Well, where? I want to source.
Everybody knows it.
Okay. I need to read this source. What is the source? I said, I have never, ever heard that before. Easter eggs might have pagan roots because of the connection with, I was leaving kind of open-ended here.
Yeah.
Because they are associated with spring and rebirth and all of the same things that are associated with Easter.
Absolutely.
Because early Catholic Church adopted a lot of pagan rituals to make it the new religion more agreeable to the pagans they were converting. Okay, most people who've done any reading realize this, that many holidays were adopted and incorporated into the church's calendar for that reason. Easter eggs came along for the ride because they're fun, they're pretty, and they're symbolic of that rebirth.
Yeah.
It isn't difficult. I don't see how it was connected to cannibalism.
They seem to want to connect anything that's pagan with cannibalism. Because, well, don't you know, the pagans performed human sacrifice. They did. In all of my research into ancient Egypt, I have yet to find human sacrifice as one of their rituals. These people had a religion that stretched for 5,000 years. Now, maybe they did. They just didn't write about it. But you'd think there'd be evidence of it somewhere. The Aztecs and the Incas, well, they did perform human sacrifice. But you know what? It's all over with now. So why are you equating modern pagans with human sacrifice? Or cannibalism?
Well, and I know that, there were some reasons behind cannibalism and that by consuming the body of someone who was either an enemy or a greatly respected person in their community, they were consuming their attributes as well.
Correct.
Okay, and this was sort of a symbolic thing, and today we find it rather horrific. Well, we find a lot about early life kind of horrific. Okay, we've come a long ways from entire families living in a small one-room hut with a fire in the middle of the room to heat up the entire place and smoke going out through a hole in the roof. Okay, we don't live like that either. Most of us would be horrified to be thrust in that situation too.
But
cannibalism wasn't something they did every day.
You say that, the cannibalism, when they would consume, say, their enemy, they were consuming the enemy's attributes. Okay. I was raised Catholic, and I remember every Sunday, because, of course, we didn't have Saturday Mass when I was growing up. We went on a Sunday, that the priest would stand there and hold up the holy gifts and say, "This is the body and blood of Christ."
Right.
And you are supposed to eat of the body and blood. Excuse me, I realize what you have there is symbolic, but what are you saying? You're saying that you're supposed to partake, and that's cannibalism, is it not?
It sure is, and granted, it's a symbolic cannibalism without a real body, but I can remember as a child being rather horrified because it sounded like cannibalism, and when I pointed it out to my catechism teacher, I got sent home.
I was just going to say, they got really offended, didn't they?
Yeah, that was the end of my catechism class.
I'll bet.
Yeah, and we're up on a break now, so hopefully, unlike my catechism teacher of days gone by, everybody is going to send me away forever and ever. So, folks, hang on to your computer. Don't lose us, and we will be right back with more with Claudia Dallaire.
If you are listening to the show and wish to join us in the chat room, visit paltalk.com. Go to the social issues, select other, and enter the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Light up your night with The Kevin Smith Show. Hi, this is Kevin Smith. Join me Monday through Friday right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Hey everybody, this is Erica Getch, and I want to keep you connected every Friday night at 8 p.m. Pacific on the Galactic Connection. As always, I'll be taking your calls in the second hour, and as always, TGC is glad to be a part of the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. So please check out tgcradio.com. Hope to see you there.
Whoa!
I always heard that his herb was top shelf. I just could not wait to find out for myself.
Don't knock it till you've tried it. Well, I've tried it, my friend. And I'll never smoke weed with Willie again.
I learned a hard lesson in a small Texas town.
He fired up a fat boy and he passed him around.
The last words I spoke before they tucked me in.
I'll never smoke weed with Willie again.
I'll never smoke weed with Willie again. My party's all over before it began. You can pour me some old Whiskey River, my friend, but I'll never smoke weed with Willie again. I hopped on his old bus, the Honeysuckle Road.
The party was Vegas, it was after the show.
Alone in the front lounge, just me and him.
With one parting puff, Grim Creeper sat in. I'll never smoke weed with Willie again. My party's all over before it began. You can pour me some old Whiskey River, my friend, but I'll never smoke weed with Willie again.
Now we're passing the guitar, telling good jokes.
I know one's a-comin' 'cause I'm smelling smoke.
No, I do not partake, I just let it pass by.
With a smile on my face and a great contact high. I'll never smoke weed with Willie again. My party's all over before it began. You can pour me some old Whiskey River, my friend, but I'll never smoke weed with Willie again.
In the fetal position, with drool on my chin,
I messed up and smoked weed with Willie again.
Did you hear?
Listen to the Church of Mavis radio show, hosted by Jeffrey Pritchett, 11 p.m. Eastern, Saturday nights. Follow your weird and journey into the high strange. Be sure to stop by www.churchofmavisradio.com for upcoming shows, paranormal news, and show archives. That's www.churchofmavisradio.com.
Hey, hi there. got your attention? I'm Gia Scott, and I was curious what you were doing from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Tuesdays. See, I host this really interesting little radio program that airs live then, and we bring in all sorts of guests. Authors, experiencers, and everything in between. It's paranormal and guaranteed to make you go, My guest list is always up at www.giascott.com, and do tune in to the Dawn of Shades from 7 to 9 p.m. on Tuesdays.
Tune in to the Mind Cemetery with your hosts Chip and Nicole every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. We delve into UFOs, abductions, ghosts, aliens, conspiracies, and cryptozoology.
And how could you ever forget about those creepy topics you won't hear on your local news?
This is where I would insert my obligatory skeptical statement. The Mind Cemetery, where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest.
Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on Facebook. Also check us out on our website, mindcemetery.com, for show updates and the critically acclaimed Mind Cemetery blog.
It's not critically acclaimed, but you should check it out anyway, mindcemetery.com.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we host News on the Flip Side. Come join us every Saturday night at 7 p.m. Central for our 3-hour program. We have opinions on everything, and we're not afraid to share them. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can find it here with News on the Flip Side. Remember, don't be politically correct. Just be correct. Join us.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and tonight we are joined by Claudia Dallaire, and we are talking about everything under the sun, but not much about your books. Claudia, before we get started on some other wild conversation, you want to tell everybody the titles of your books and where they can find them?
Certainly. The titles of my books are Egyptian Love Spells and Rituals, Egyptian Revenge Spells, Egyptian Prosperity Magic, and my novel is The Wrath of Amun. All 4 books are available on Amazon.com because all of them are through different publishers.
Ah.
That's why.
Well, it makes
Amazon
sense to me.
It's easier to find me there.
Yes, it is. It's an easy place to shop. And, folks, you can also find my debut novel, The Time of Chaos, there, as well as a couple of cookbooks that I recently released. Now, before we go any further, too, listen up, everybody. You can send me an email with questions, comments, opinions, whatever you want, to giascott@exogenynetwork.com. Okay, well, we were talking about all sorts of things before we went on break. One topic that had cropped up but didn't get much wordplay, you might say, was another hot topic here lately is gun control. Now, I know the ancient Egyptians didn't have guns, but I'm sure they had weapons of the era.
They did. Absolutely they did. Their weapons, however, were up close and personal. They, of course, there was no gunpowder at that point in time, so if you wanted to kill someone, it was, you had a sword, you had a sickle sword, also called a khopesh, you had daggers, of course you always had my favorite, poison.
Yeah, poison's been around a long time.
Oh, yes. They have lovely plant poisons. And so, yes, you could very easily dispatch someone. But
didn't they have archers?
To get up. Pardon me?
Did they have archers yet?
They had archers. Oh, yeah, you could kill someone with a bow and arrow. Oh, yeah, they had a lovely composite bow.
Okay.
But the Egyptians didn't have the catapult. That wasn't invented yet. Let's see. So, like I said, primarily you were getting up close and personal. You could always strangle someone. They did do that. But again, we're talking, this isn't going to be a personal act. It's not going to be, I can take someone down at 50 yards. You can't do that.
So for criminal offenses of whatever flavor, did they use putting people to death as one of their potential punishments?
They did. They had several forms of execution. If you were a noble, sometimes you would be allowed to do the honorable thing, which would be to commit suicide, usually by drinking a poison, or as Cleopatra very nicely illustrated, you could use a snake. They also had, and the other two are really horrifying. One is what Vlad the Impaler used. They would impale people on a stake, and the person would slowly die. It's really gruesome. And the other form of execution was you would be burned alive.
Equally gruesome, I think. Yeah.
Equally gruesome. Yeah.
Now, I know that, in later years that executions became sort of public entertainment. People would come from near and far to watch someone being executed. Was that true during the Egyptian era as well?
I haven't found in my research that this was a public execution. They may have done it publicly. In my first novel, when my killer is sentenced to death, he is actually taken out into the desert and put on a stake. So, and no one liked to venture into the desert. So he would have just been left out there to die, however long it may have taken. And then eventually the falcons and, any other prey animals would have come along and picked his bones clean. It was kind of effective, in a gruesome sort of way. But in ancient Egypt, obviously, if you were sentenced to death, then you weren't going to receive a proper burial either, which meant you were being sentenced to eternal death. There was, no rebirth in the afterlife, no one to mourn you. So this was the end.
Yeah.
So it was gruesome in a lot of ways.
So was it something that they used commonly?
Yes. Oh, yes. Execution was, it was not frowned upon. But there's also a caveat to that. In order to, the ancient Egyptians were absolutely appalled at the idea of murder, because desecrating a body was absolutely against everything they believed in. So if you could be a thief, that was okay. And, you would have to make restitution and you would receive punishment. But to kill someone, to take someone's life was really a horrible thing in Egyptian society. And I've read where even the priests and the embalmers who handled bodies for proper burial when you were, say, a nobleman and you died and they were going to mummify you, the person who actually cut into the body to remove the internal organs, which had to be removed for mummification, that person would be stoned. They wouldn't be stoned to death, but they would be stoned because you had desecrated a body and you had to be punished in the eyes of the gods because this was just a terrible thing to do.
That's kind of strange to think of. And that professional embalmers would have had to regularly undergo these stonings.
Correct. And some of these quote-unquote professional embalmers were priests at the temple. So here you are stoning your local priest as well. But that was how strongly life was viewed in ancient Egypt. To take a life was just abhorrent to them. And then, if a person did die, desecrating that body was equally abhorrent.
Did they use stoning as a method of execution?
No.
Okay.
Surprisingly enough. Their main methods of execution were impaling and burning alive. And I found that very interesting, especially the burning alive, because they have no trees in ancient Egypt. They imported all the wood that they had, and they had beautiful wood because they would import cedar from Lebanon, they would import ebony, they would import myrrh trees, and so all of the wood that they used was all imported because the only real trees they had were palm trees. And you can't use palm for, building a coffin or building, putting beams in a house.
Okay.
But
all right. Well, I guess being at the mouth of the Nile, essentially, at least they had the Nile to bring wood from forested regions. But Lebanon, they had to ship that overland, or did they bring it by ships?
They probably brought it overland to a port, and then it would be, sent to Egypt by way of the Mediterranean and then down the Nile.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
it's kind of amazing to realize that this society was devoid of something that we regard as, one of the earliest construction materials.
Yeah.
And we still use it today.
Yeah. They were also devoid of an animal that everyone seems to associate with the desert. The ancient Egyptians did not know what a camel was. They had never seen a camel. Camels didn't arrive in Egypt or in that desert area until I think it was after Alexander.
So quite late in their history.
Yes, which is why if you look at the hieroglyph, there is no hieroglyph for camel because they didn't know what a camel was.
And yet they knew about animals like the lion.
Oh, yes.
Zebras.
They knew about all different kinds of monkeys and baboons because they were imported. They imported giraffes, ostriches, but they had never seen a camel. Camel did not start in Egypt, and yet it's something you associate with. They have pictures of camels, and the backdrop behind it is a pyramid.
Yeah.
Not in ancient Egypt. Yeah.
Okay.
I found that very interesting.
Yeah. The whole idea of no camels in ancient Egypt.
I've learned a lot in my research on what we normally associate with Egypt or the desert may be more of a modern construct than actually an ancient construct. So.
Well, they had cattle and goats, right?
Uh-huh. They had cattle, they had oxen, they had donkeys, they had horses, and actually horses were introduced in the Middle Kingdom. In the Old Kingdom, they didn't have horses. Horses were brought in by the Hyksos because they brought chariots. The Egyptians didn't have chariots until the Hyksos arrived.
So, and they had dogs. Do they have dogs all along? And cats?
They had dogs. Yep, dogs, cats. Oh, cats were very important in Egyptian society. Of course, most of these animals also were deities and had, special attributes. The jackal was the guardian of the underworld. The cat was seen as a symbol of fertility, and that I can understand, because if you have a cat that isn't spayed, what is that cat going to do? It's going to reproduce, and a lot.
Instead of one cat, you'll have 20 cats.
Exactly. But at the same time, the reason it was a symbol of fertility, it was also a symbol of motherhood, because by and large, most cats are very good mothers. They nurture their young. They teach them how to hunt until the kittens are able to be on their own, and then, then they don't need mother anymore. Right. So cats were seen as a beneficent goddess of fertility and motherhood. And I can understand this. I mean, their concepts make perfect sense.
Now, in addition to the dogs and the cats and the donkeys and the goats and the cattle and the horses, did they have poultry?
They did have ducks. They had geese. Chickens, don't recall reading anywhere about chickens.
Well,
but I know
chickens originated in Asia, so that may have not gotten to the western part of the continent yet.
Because there's a lot of talk of them hunting waterfowl. They loved going into the marshes and hunting the marsh birds. So you did have ibises, and you obviously had the ducks and the geese, and I'm sure there were other marsh birds that probably are extinct now, because I'm assuming they probably ate the eggs in some form. It's kind of hard to always know what they ate, because the nobles and, of course, the kings, the royalty, ate far different diets than your average Egyptian. Your average Egyptian, as they were working at whatever job they worked at, they were paid, because there was no money, they would be paid in foodstuffs, and it was usually bread, onions, garlic, leeks, and beer. So and those were staples.
Weren't they paid salt sometimes too? Weren't they also paid in salt
sometimes? Yup. But those were staples of the average person's diet. They did have a lot of beans. Lentils was a very popular vegetable. But, when you read about the nobility or the royalty, they were eating antelope and gazelle and oryx, a type of deer. So, they were eating all of these wonderful, and some of them in a lot of cases were very fatty meat. But your average Egyptian never saw food like this, which is why they would hunt the waterfowl. At least they were getting some form of meat. And fishing was also, there were literally, I don't want to say hundreds of, but there were multiple types of fish in the Nile. So your average Egyptian would go out and fish every day. And, of course, salt was very important because they could salt the fish to preserve it for a couple of days.
Yeah, so, I know that they ate a primitive type of wheat and barley. Is that what they made their beer and their bread from?
Yes. But what we consider beer and what they considered beer are two far different things.
Yeah. I guess we need a musical interlude. I have no idea why we're getting music. A little hard to talk over. But
there we go. That sounds better.
Yeah. I don't know what it was all about. I don't know what the song was, but it was interesting anyhow, right?
Their beer was primarily made from barley. Whoa!
Yeah.
Darling, you know that I'm leaving, but that don't mean it's gone. Well, you gave me the truth,
and then again, maybe we can't. Hopefully it'll stop here soon. Yeah, you gotta love live radio, especially if your producer's computer decides to become possessed.
Yeah.
Nothing like a possessed computer or two to offer some strange musical interludes inserted in there.
A ghost in the machine.
Yeah, well, paranormal takes on a whole new meaning with the Paranormal Radio Network at times.
There you go. But
we were talking about, the Egyptian foods. I'm trying to imagine making a dinner of onions, leeks, garlic. Do they have olive oil?
They did have a lot of different kinds of oil. Olive was one. Olive they could have made there. I think a lot of it was imported from Lebanon, Cyprus. Let's see, they had a lot of honey. Honey was a very big food because it was also used medicinally. Honey would be put on a wound to help heal it. Honey was also used in mummification. So you had beekeeping in ancient Egypt.
Okay. So,
we don't think of that, but
I'm still trying to imagine this dinner of garlics, leeks, onions, maybe some duck meat of some kind or some waterfowl meat or fish, and very little oil with a dash of honey on bread. It's not pretty.
Yeah. Well, what can I say?
I'm sure they ate some more vegetables than onions, leeks, and garlic.
Oh, absolutely. They had different types of beans. They had chickpeas. They had lentils. Let's see, what other? They also had fruits. They had dates and figs. So, you could also have that with the fish. Off the top of my head, I can't remember all the foods they had.
Right.
But
well,
they
I've tried
have quite a variety.
In the past, and most of them are not well suited to the modern palate. They're not as flavorful or refined or texturally pleasing as what we're accustomed to today. And I'm sure the bread was heavier and coarser because hand ground flour is coarse, and barley and the early wheats didn't have gluten enough to raise it a great deal. And their yeast would have been primitive as well. Ovens would have been primitive. So, you're assuming that they had a somewhat heavy, coarse bread. And most of us have tried some bread that was heavy and coarse at some point, whether it was accident that it turned out that way or because we were, trying out a recipe that was supposed to be that way. But, it did, I'm sure that, a lot of their foods were stewed simply because it was an easy way to cook, and much early cooking was stewed. Roasted on a fire was also a common way to cook things. Trying to
also have but there is something that they did have. They also had spices. They used cinnamon. They used coriander. Let's see, cumin. Trying to think of some of the spices that they had. I know they had sesame that they could also use to flavor up things. Because I've read, they had anise. So, they did have these lovely flavorful spices and herbs that they could use. They knew thyme. They knew, I think they had parsley. So, once you may have all of these bland foods, but you do have something you can put in them so that they're not going to be quite as bland. Because I know I was reading the royal family often ate, I don't know, they really didn't have cakes, so to speak, but they called them honey cakes. It was a form of dessert. It was probably a better type of bread, and it was flavored with honey, and they had different types, and they had them flavored with anise or with cinnamon, and, I read that, and I thought, now that sounds kind of nice.
Well, too, and they're commonly sold as gourmet energy bars and the like, but you can make a cake using grain combined with honey, dried fruits, and whatnot. It's sort of all pounded together to make a paste, and then the paste would be sticky, but it could be eaten as a cake form.
Sure.
That was wrapped in something else, or you just picked up and ate the sticky stuff. I mean, most of us have picked up and eaten, maybe we made a batch of fudge that didn't come out quite right and didn't set up as firm as we'd like, and it was more or less a sticky lump. And that would be similar to what a kind of a cake you could make with no refined flours and whatnot in it. And it was probably quite tasty, especially if you're eating mostly garlics, onion, leeks, and fish or whatever, it would be delicious.
Yep. But, they did, and of course some of the things that we would never associate as being food, they also ate. They would eat papyrus. Because papyrus and reeds were, very commonplace in the marshes. That could be eaten as well, like a vegetable. Certain flowers. I know the blue lotus is extinct. To my knowledge, I think there is one that still, I do believe, in a British, I don't think it's in the British Museum, but I think they have a gardens where they do still have, one remaining blue lotus, because the ancient Egyptians used it so extensively, it's just gone, because they consumed it for all kinds of things. They loved to smell it. They would steep it in wine because it had narcotic properties. It was like a drug. They used it in medicine. They probably ate the seeds just the way they were, and they probably got a really great high from them. It was probably like poppies, because the ancient Egyptians didn't have poppies, but the island of Cyprus did, because I've read of the Egyptians importing what was called Cyprus wine. And it appears from my research that Cyprus wine was just a wine that they produced on Cyprus, but they would steep poppy flowers in it, so that it was a very strong wine, and it was often used with traumatic injuries. You would have someone drink a little Cyprus wine before you would operate on them, because it's going to deaden the pain. Or at that point, they're not going to care.
Okay.
Because, again, we're dealing with primitive medicine, and you don't have anesthesia to put these people out, so how are you going to get them to be compliant? You're either going to have an herbal drug that you can give them, or you're going to get them stinking drunk.
Yeah.
Or both.
Yeah, I cannot imagine being stinking drunk enough to let somebody cut me open, but we're going to assume that they seldom drank alcohol and had little resistance to its effects, okay? Some things I guess I'm better off just not imagining. Yeah.
Well, the other thing you have to remember is if someone comes at you with a copper blade and they're going to cut you open and you're stinking drunk, after that first incision, most of these people are going to pass out anyway. So you're not going to feel it then.
That first cut, yeah.
Exactly. The first cut is the deepest.
Yeah. It had to be very interesting to be an ancient Egyptian doctor, that's for sure, or surgeon, more specifically.
Oh, yes. And one of them, I went to my college reunion this weekend, and the subject of the ancient Egyptians came up because a lot of the people I was reconnecting with are now aware of the fact that I am an author, and they're very fascinated by what I write. And I was sitting with a group of gentlemen who were all local musicians when I was going to college, and we got them together for a reunion as well. And one of them was asking me about, Egyptian medical procedures, and I said, you really don't want to know about, because he had mentioned circumcision, and he said, it must have been terrible for infants to be circumcised with no anesthetic, no antibiotics, no this, no that. And I looked at him and I said to him, the Hebrews circumcised their babies after, I think it was like 4 or 5 days, and that's still standard among Jews today. I said the ancient Egyptians used circumcision as a passage into manhood, and they all got a little kind of white as a sheet. And I said, yeah, a young boy would be circumcised at approximately the age of 12 or 13. And they all did, like, oh, that's just, and I'm saying to myself, yeah, that must have been really painful. Well, that's what they use for anesthetic. How are you going to get someone to stand there and go through that, number one? And then I read something even more horrifying. If you were not Egyptian, say you were a Libyan or a Cushite, and you moved to Egypt, and you decided you wanted to become a priest in the temple, and you were, say, 25 years old and married, and you weren't circumcised, you couldn't become a priest until you were. So, and it was done ritually in the temple. This was was very important. It was a ritual. It was for purity. You had to be purified in order to serve in the temple. You know, it wasn't, you know, that this was something that they wanted to do to hurt you. This was very important. There was a lot of mystique to going through this. So, you know, when you became a man, which was 12 or 13 in Egyptian society, in order to, you know, be fully a man, you were circumcised. Oh, that's painful.
Well, you know, I have to admit, I'm not a man, okay? I know that comes as a great surprise to everybody, but I'm not a man. But growing up, you know, I came from a cowboy family, and it was a very common thing that the guys would bring home mountain oysters in 5-gallon buckets. Now, for people who don't know what mountain oysters are, hopefully they're not as naive as I was as a child, because I really thought my uncle and cousins rode up into the mountains and collected these oysters. They don't come from the mountains. Okay, they don't come from the mountains, guys. No. They are actually, it's the testicles from cattle as a result of castration. Well, they would bring them home in the sack, in the buckets, and then they would sit on the back porch and they would skin them. And
they'd shuck them.
They'd shuck them and wash them, and then they came in the house and they were washed again. And, you know, the pocket knife that my uncle had used all day to castrate cattle was probably never going to see soap and water, and it would cut up our lunch when we were out on Sunday, you know, doing our Sunday drive thing. We never thought a thing about it. Nobody ever got sick, okay?
Well, of course not.
But then we would cook the mountain oysters and we would eat them. Now, I knew what they were, and as a teenager, I also was expected to, you know, sort of assume my womanly role and begin cooking as well. And there would be a whole mess of this. And my aunt at that time had these massive skillets. And I'm not kidding. I think they were like 24-inch diameter iron skillets. They weighed a ton. Yep. And she'd have 2 of those going, cooking these mountain oysters, which tells you how many she was cooking. And I really wasn't enthusiastic about it. You know, it wasn't like a great delicacy to me. It was just something, and that's what we're having for dinner. No big deal. I have to admit, if I did the cooking, I didn't eat them because they were kind of icky to cook. Especially when they were big ones and you had to cut them in half before you breaded them and fried them. Really, just they weren't pretty, okay? They just taste like meat. You didn't have to think about what part it came from. And, you know, when you talk about mountain oysters, now that I no longer live in the West and I live in Mississippi, if I bring up mountain oysters with anybody, it's funny to watch the men. Because the men will consistently, like, cross their legs and, you know, assume a very defensive position. It's like, dude, this came from cattle, not people. I don't go around with a pocket knife, okay? You know, they're really, really horrified about them. And to us in the West, especially in the cattle culture of the era, it was, you know, mountain oyster fries were held like the rest of the country has Friday fish fries.
Yeah.
I mean, it was you know, for many people it was a delicacy because you had to know somebody who was castrating a lot of cattle to do it, and it wasn't something that happened very often. Yeah. Now, my aunt talks about as when she was little, obviously she's older than me, they would castrate when they were branding, and they would actually throw these testicles in the sack right on the branding fire, which at that time you had a fire, you heated up an actual iron thing, and you branded the cattle, which was different than it's done today, I guess. But anyhow, they would be cooked there, and you knew when they were done because the charred sack would burst open, and that's when you fished them out of the fire and ate them. And she still thinks that was the best meat ever. You know, and she's ever so much more than 20 now. She's no longer a little kid either. And, you know, I have never seen them cooked that way. I've heard about it, but I've never seen them cooked that way. I've never been on a branding when they were branding and castrating and dehorning and all that. I've never experienced that. Things change over the eras, and now most cowboys, when they're rounding up cattle, don't even ride a horse. It's usually done on a four-wheeler, so things have changed a lot. But this was part of our whole Western culture. The whole cowboy culture thing that was idolized in movies, and I guess people in Europe are still gaga over the whole idea of a cowboy. And I know that there were occasions when I would be riding a horse near a civilization. I usually rode in the boonies, and people would stop to take pictures. And, you'd hear them talking, and they were sure I was Navajo, and I'm no more Navajo than I'm Chinese. I was riding an Appaloosa horse, which was not even really an Arizona thing, which is where I lived at the time. And I'm thinking, these poor tourists, they have no clue, But because my hair was braided, they assumed I was an Indian, and I was a Navajo Indian, so Navajos don't even braid their hair. The research was kind of off base, but I'm sure you encounter it a lot even with researching the ancient Egypt thing too. A lot of the information is blatantly incorrect, especially later years.
Oh, yes. Yes. And, someone said to me, how do you decide if what you're reading is really historically correct? Well, I'm the type of person, I'm not going to use something in a book unless I can find independent sources that say the same thing. If I have one reference to something, to me, that's a nice anecdote. Is it historically correct? Unless I can find other sources that are not connected to the first source, no, it's just an anecdote, and I keep that tucked away so that maybe sometime down the road I can find another source to back it up. But, when I read books and I see facts in there that have, later been proven to not be facts, why did you put it in the book unless you could back this up with, at least several sources to say this?
Right.
And, that is kind of how I approach my research. I like to see at least 2 or 3 sources to say the same thing. And
now,
that can be
with
difficult.
nonfiction, you have this sort of responsibility to be somewhat accurate. Is that somewhat eased up when you're writing fiction material?
Oh, no. I think it's even harder when I'm writing the fiction because I want that fiction, although my story is fiction. The place, the food, the dress, everything has to be historically correct because your reader, my reader who picks up a mystery novel on ancient Egypt is not your normal reader. They're picking that up because they have either an interest in ancient Egypt or they're familiar with the culture to begin with, and they will be able to spot an inconsistency. And then I'm not being true to my reader.
Okay. That makes absolute sense. Do you think that most historical fiction writers sort of hold that as a basic truth?
Oh, yes. I've spoken with other authors who have written historical fiction, and they say the same thing. The devil is in the details. And even some of the books that I've read on writing historical fiction have said the reader of historical fiction is intelligent. They will spot inconsistencies, and that's the best way to lose your audience, is to have a glaring inconsistency in a book. So I'm very particular with my research.
I know that when I'm reading a book that has something to do with something, whatever it is, that I am well versed in, if the material is inaccurate, I'm somewhat disgusted, I guess. I'm irritated, the author.
Yeah. So and that was one.
True.
Now, that was one of the reasons I became an author. And this is nothing against the History Channel, because I've watched hundreds of absolutely fabulous programs on the History Channel. However, occasionally they do get things wrong because you have to have someone checking your facts. And I was sitting there watching a History Channel special, and they were talking about something in ancient Egypt, and maybe the person, misread the script because there was an announcer who was obviously reading what was in front of him. But I sat there and I looked at the person I was with and I said, oh, no, that's not correct. That's the wrong dynasty they're talking about. Now, if I could pick that up, other people could pick that up. So that was one of the defining moments when I said, I'm going to write a book, and I want to make it historically accurate because this is my passion. I love everything about ancient Egypt. I love reading about their history, their religious practices, their everyday life. I've even read accounts of trials that were held in ancient Egypt. So this is what I do. And if I'm going to do this, then I'm also going to do it well. I'm not going to do it half-heartedly. So.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I usually am regarding written material from the reader's point of view. So, I can understand things fairly readily. Hopefully I carry that same ability to see from that angle when I write things. I hope so. I strive to.
Yeah.
Because I think that's important. Because if I can't put the shoe on the other foot, so to speak, then, we've all read material that was just, you didn't get it. You couldn't figure out where the author was coming from or what their point was, I guess. And I don't want to be like that. And I'm sure that's true for other people. There's lots and lots of sources out there for people who are aspiring to become authors. Can you suggest some?
Yes, as a matter of fact. The first thing I usually look for is, it has to depend on what time period you want to write in. But there are a number of books that actually deal with daily life in, say, ancient India or ancient China, or daily life in Renaissance Italy. Those books are absolutely fabulous because they distill a lot of information and you get the flavor of what it was like to live there. They cover things like what foods they ate, what the different religions were, the major events during that time. So you've got a lot of basic facts right there at your fingertips. You can then, if you find something that strikes your fancy, then you get into, a much deeper research. But it gives you all of the basics that you need to actually construct your time period. So those are absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, it would be, because you have to have a good grasp of what day-to-day life was like. Otherwise, how are your characters going to walk through their day?
Exactly. And, what are they going to be walking in? Are they wearing sandals? Are they wearing boots? Are they barefoot? You know, what did they wear on their feet?
Yeah.
You know, these are things that, you know, if he's walking across, say, a marble floor, are you going to hear his heels hitting the marble floor? If he's barefoot, he's going to be relatively silent. You know, so you need to know this. This is very important to your reader because you're setting that scene. Your words are painting a picture. And if you paint it properly, they will hear the sound of his feet on that marble floor.
Yeah. Or feel it under their own feet, as you describe it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, so it is, I guess, to have a good grasp of the physical world that your characters live in is very, very important too, whether they're set in ancient Egypt or Mississippi or California or the mountains someplace or wherever. If you don't have some sort of familiarity with the things that they would be looking at, seeing, smelling, hearing, I think it'd be kind of tough to write about.
Sure. Well, what if you're a lady in waiting in King Henry's court back in Tudor England? You know, what do you eat? What do you wear? What do you do for fun? You know, what kind of games did they play? What kind of activities would you be involved in? You'd probably be sewing a lot or doing needlepoint or tapestry. You know, they had lawn games, so you might be playing, you know, a form of cricket or croquet. But these are things that all add to a historical novel, that you have their recreation activities because, you know, we work for a living, but we also have fun. We do things. You know, we don't just exist in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
very, very
you know,
true.
if your character doesn't have to work, then what does your character do?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have them do something.
Well, yeah, most of us don't get up in the morning, get dressed, and eat breakfast, and then sit and wait until lunchtime, and then sit and wait for dinner. We only leave the house on Sunday when we go to church. That's not a real accurate life. Actually, you know, when you have the experience of sitting down and having to list what you actually do, you may find yourself surprised. Mm-hmm. You may not be as active as you thought, and you may discover that, gee, golly, I don't do anything at all. Usually our perception of what we're doing and what we're really doing can turn out to be quite different. We are getting down to the last minute or so of the show. You want to remind everybody again of the titles of your books and where they can find them?
Absolutely, Gia. All of my books are located on Amazon.com, and they are Egyptian Love Spells and Rituals, Egyptian Revenge Spells, Egyptian Prosperity Magic, and The Wrath of Amun, my first novel, historical mystery set in ancient Egypt. And look forward to book 2, which should be, the scheduled release date is the end of July.
Ooh, we're getting close now. Are you as anxious as someone who's about to have their baby born on the end of July?
Oh, yes. I am.
Can you kind of give us a brief synopsis of what the story's about?
The Talisman of Tahuti is about an unscrupulous vendor in the marketplace who is selling fake relics. And he turns up dead in his shop during the investigation. And we have to determine if it was just an accident, if it was just fate that he was going to die because he was in ill health, or if it was murder.
Yeah. Plenty of mystery there, Claudia.
Oh, yes.
There must be a little of Agatha Christie in you.
Oh, maybe. I always liked Agatha Christie.
I didn't read a whole lot of her books, I have to admit. For people who are curious about mine, it's called The Time of Chaos. You can find it on Amazon. I've also got 2 cookbooks. One's 55 Fantastic Fudges, and the other one is all chocolate. Recipes anyone can, or easy and economical recipes anyone can make at home. Get it right. And it's all normal recipes, for chocolatey stuff that you can make at home without having a whole host of helpers to create some exotic dish. Yeah. So yeah, you can find all of those on Amazon. They're all 3 available on Kindle, and Time of Chaos is also available as a paperback. With that, we do hope that Claudia will be joining us. We still have, I think 2 more shows in the Author Conversation series coming up, and one of them happens to be, the last one of the series, happens to be someone you've actually mentored, Claudia.
Yes, Joshua Bishop. He's a fabulous young man. He and I used to work together at Borders before Borders met their demise.
Yeah, it's hard to keep straight. Who's met their demise and who hasn't?
Oh, I know, but I'm sure he will be a fabulous guest. He is just a wonderful guy.
So we're looking forward to that, and Claudia will be joining us then, and possibly next week too, when Christine McIntyre will be our guest. And she wrote a book, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, but the way I've been mentally pronouncing it has been Yana Sleep. And it's a fascinating novel, and we'll hear more about it then next week. And like I said, anybody who's got questions or comments, wants to suggest a guest, wants to be a guest even, go ahead and email me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com. And that's spelled GIASCOTT at Exogeny Network, EXOGENYNETWORK.com. And you can send me emails and tell me what you think of the series and what you hope to see us have as topics in the future too. As well as find the page on Facebook for the Dawn-of-Shades or my author page. But unfortunately, folks, we have run out of time all too quickly once again. I hope that tonight's program has given you a little bit of entertainment and plenty of food for thought and more illumination for your personal journey towards truth. Tune in again next time as we bring another guest, another topic, and a whole new idea as we continue our Author Conversation series. You've been listening tonight to the Dawn of Shades, and I'm your host, Gia Scott. And good night.
Seriously, nothing.
Free today!